introduce a Professor Stephan Lewandowsky. He's been around quite a while in Australia and then moved on to Bristol a few years ago. And he has been pretty much a very significant cognitive scientist in Australia ever since he came to Western Australia. When was that?
Well, the first time, 1987.
1987. And and since then, he's been going around the world. He taught at in the US after getting a PhD in Toronto, if I remember correctly, and then moved over here, 87, I suppose. And he's produced a huge number of wonderful students, one of whom is right here in the audience as well. And his influence has been extending beyond the borders. And well, he started off as a wonderful computational cognitive scientist. And I remember reading his psych review papers, multiple of them, memory and decision-making and all those sorts of things. And then the next time I realized he was talking about climate change. And that's where I began to read his work a lot more. And I'm sort of thinking that you have become more like a social psychologist. You know? But anyway,
well, that's your influence, Yoshi. It happens to all of us.
I'd like to think so, but no. But his research has really had the huge impact on the climate change discourse and the conspiracy theories and so on around this. And today, I think we are going to be hearing his latest thinking about these sorts of issues, but in much broader context of technology, democracy, and cognition. And please welcome Professor Lewandowsky.
Thank you. Thanks, Yoshi. Social psychologist. I've been called all sorts of things: a public intellectual, a political psychologist, now a social psychologist. My God. But it's actually, it is, well, sort of true, I guess. I do a lot of work now that is pretty remote from the stuff I used to do on computational models of memory. And what I want to do today is to give you sort of a broad overview of this issue, the intersection between technology and democracy, and what the pressure points are and how we might have a solution to those problems. Now, this is my first in-person talk, I think, in about 2.5 years or something. And so, which is a really weird experience because, you know, usually I sit there and talk to Zoom and then I can say things like, oh, I'll pop that link into the chat. And that's much harder to do now that I'm standing up here and talking without having access to my computer. So there's a couple of points actually in this talk that may be Zoom optimized and are not optimized for in-person presentation. So why am I studying technology and democracy? Well, I do so, one of the reasons I do is because if you look at analyses by various different independent organizations and institutions, then you find that there's a lot of evidence that democracy is in retreat globally. So what you can see here is a list of countries and their democracy score observed over a decade between 2000.
Sorry to interrupt, but on the Zoom, we're not actually seeing a change of slide.
Oh, no. Okay. Well, I don't know why that would be the case.
Yeah.
Is that true for everybody on Zoom? Is it a slow connection or is it a fault in the?
Yeah, I'm still seeing the title screen.
Oh, God.
Me too.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, well then
Odd.
oh, wait a minute, we'll share that screen then.
Yeah, that works.
Rather than the.
Yeah, we could try just resharing and see if that works, because then otherwise you're gonna have all this popping up.
Okay, so what can you see now?
Same thing.
Same thing. So it's not,
Okay.
well, let me stop sharing.
Oh, yeah, that's stopped. That's succeeded.
Good, all right, well, let me try sharing. Okay, what do you see now?
Yeah, no, that's it.
Ah,
A scatter
Yeah.
plot.
That's got it.
yep.
Okay, cool. Well, let me know if it moves on from here. This isn't the only slide I'm going to show you today. So, and basically what you see here is a decadal trend in democracy where anything below, well, now it's not working for me. Ah, yes, it is. There should have been an arrow that popped up that says decline on it. You got that? Wonderful.
We
Seems
got
to
that.
work now. Okay, so any point below the diagonal on, now this is all, okay, it's doing weird stuff. So any point below the diagonal is a country that has lost its democratic credentials to some extent over the last 10 years. And concerningly, that includes a lot of European countries and the USA, which is identified on the slide. And now there are some countries above the diagonal reflecting an increase in democracy. But I would argue that in key countries, democratic countries, there is clear evidence for democratic backsliding over the last 10 years. And it doesn't matter who's analyzing the data and how you present the data. This is a different organization called Freedom House that looked at these data over the last 15 years. And what you can see there is the same pattern. The number of what they call free countries are declining. The number of not free countries, I guess dictatorships, are increasing. So I take that as a departure point, and I take that as a cause for concern. Now, what does that have to do with cognition or cognitive science? Well, it has a lot to do with it if you take this intermediate step, which is the potential role of social media in causing these effects. Now, I think that claim is quite adventurous, and I'm not making it, but a lot of people have expressed concern about how social media do have a toxic effect on democracy. And it is not entirely implausible that that should be the case, given how huge those social media platforms are. These data are 5 years old, and by now the numbers are even more amazing, but the population of Facebook is equivalent to that of 6.5 times the United States, if you just count up the number of users. So there's certainly the potential there for a strong impact of social media on, well, on public life, on democracy, on the way we live generally. Now, I think, as I've already said, that's a very sort of difficult question to consider because there's no easy binary answer. Are social media, is Facebook to blame for the decline in democracy? Well, that's just way too big a question. You'd have to break it down, make it more nuanced, and sort of, say, well, what could it be blamed for? How would it work? What is the cognition? And how would we know that this was going on? And so my research and that of my colleagues over the last 5 years or so, at least, has been focused on identifying pressure points between online media and democracy that arise out of our human cognition, our cognitive apparatus. And by way of background, if you're interested in this full analysis, this is one of the places where I would normally pop that link into the chat if I was talking on Zoom. My colleagues and I wrote a report for the European Commission that came out about 18 months ago. And that is where we analyzed those pressure points and tried to find solutions to the problem. And that is what I want to tell you about during the rest of my talk today. Now, by our analysis, we've identified 4 key pressure points between online technologies and democracy. And those pressure points arise out of the conflict between human cognition and what the online environment is offering us. So there's 4 of them. There's the attention economy, choice architectures, algorithms, and of course, misinformation and disinformation. Each one of those would be worthy of its own talk, at least. So I can't talk about all of them in great detail. I'll mention them all, but I want to focus in particular on algorithms and misinformation and disinformation. So that'll be sort of the lion's share of my talk. So what is the attention economy? Well, the attention economy is basically what we now have whenever you go online, pretty much, certainly whenever you use most social media. What happens is that you are the product. That is, human attention is the main product online. And as a rule of thumb, if you're using anything online that's free, then you're being sold. Otherwise, it wouldn't be free. Okay, so it isn't actually free. You're paying a price, but it's a very hidden price that I want to analyze in a bit more detail in just a moment. So, and the reason this works, or the reason it's designed that way, is because the more time you and I spend on a platform, be it Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, TikTok, you name it, the more time we spend on there, the more we're going to be exposed to advertisers. And that is what makes the system drive. That is why we have features such as the autoplay feature on YouTube, which is on by default. And that means if you go to YouTube, you watch a video, the next one will start instantly. And you can turn that off, but it's actually kind of a hassle to turn it off. And so this thing just keeps playing videos that the machine thinks are of interest to you. Now, this is not all bad. This has actually enabled the creation of an amazing array of useful and free services. I mean, you know, I couldn't live without Google Maps or all the other Google products out there. I can do without Facebook, I must admit, but you know, Twitter, I'm on Twitter a lot. All of this stuff is wonderful, but we got to understand that it comes with a cost, and the cost arises out of what Plunkett has called a fundamental misalignment of the attention market, the attention economy. Now, it's worth reviewing just very briefly that traditional markets produce consumer goods to satisfy the consumer's preferences, right? So a company that makes toasters or cars makes money by satisfying your preferences. Well, of course, it's all distorted through advertising, God knows what else, but the essence is still true. If you sell consumers a car that blows up on impact, then there is a strong signal to the manufacturer that that's not a good idea. Okay, and there's countless examples of that feedback operating. Cars that explode on impact tend to disappear from the market and tend to damage the reputation of Ford. In that case, they produced the Pinto. That was basically a driving bomb whenever it was hit from behind. And word gets around and reputations suffer, and the manufacturers have to respond because there is an alignment of interests between the producers and the consumers. Imperfectly aligned, but basically it is aligned. An airliner that crashes every week is not going to attract a lot of consumers. And that feedback is pervasive in a conventional market economy. Now, the problem with the attention economy is that the human being who's in there, that's us, the user, is not in a similar relationship to the platforms as you are to your car manufacturer or your airline or whatever. Now, attention markets take users' data and time and exchange it for advertising fees. So the profits on the platform do not come from the user, they come from the advertisers. So the alignment of interests is between the platforms like Google or Facebook and the advertisers. The users are completely irrelevant as a first approximation to that transaction. Now, of course, if all the users go, then the platform is in trouble. But that's true. But there is no direct link or feedback opportunity if the advertisers and the platforms are doing stuff that is not satisfying the users. And what happens if the advertisers' users run counter to the well-being of users? What's the feedback mechanism there what's the equivalent of an exploding car online that might change the platform's behaviors or the advertisers' behaviors? Well, it turns out that, first of all, it's very unclear where that feedback would be coming from. And moreover, to make it worse, there is actually good evidence that the attention economy might be fundamentally acting against the best interests of the user. Why? Well, because we know from decades of research in cognitive, this is where it comes in handy that I used to be a cognitive scientist, human attention is captured by novelty and by negative emotions, outrage, and whatever else that was. Negative things that happen attract our attention. Now, it follows from that if you make stuff up that is outrage provoking and you invent fake news, that then you've created something that you can display on the platforms that the platforms will love because it is keeping the user engaged. And if the only metric of the attention economy is user engagement, then you all of a sudden have a machine that is basically optimized to present people with crap, because that is what attracts our attention, whether we like it or not. People can't drive past a car accident, however horrific it is, without looking. That's human attention. There's not much you can do about, you can't turn that off. We just evolved that way. So the claim that one can make that arises from that is that the very structure of the online platforms incentivizes poor quality information over high quality information because of this attentional bias. And I think understanding that is crucial if you ever want to fix anything, whatever it might be that needs fixing, in order to solve some of these problems. So that's by way of background, the attention economy. There's a huge amount, obviously, that could be said about that, but I'll leave it at that and move on to choice architectures, which is the design of online options, menus, and so on, that are driving people in the platform's interest towards a certain behavior that may not be in the user's interest. Now, again, there's a lot of stuff to be said about here. I just want to be very brief and remind you that defaults can prompt people into lenient privacy settings, for example, accepting all the cookies and accepting all the defaults, which of course I do. I can't be bothered to spend 30 seconds to customize some travel website so it's not tracking all my activity. Of course not, which is sort of the whole point. They trap you in a cycle of convenience. And there's other things, there's countless examples, So Facebook, for example, wants you to keep your face recognition turned on to protect you. Sounds very nice, doesn't it? I have my doubts about that being a protective measure. It probably is something that is maximizing their profits instead. And dark patterns, I don't know if you've come across those. Deleting your Amazon account is incredibly difficult. That's just one example that's pretty famous, but you come across dark patterns all the time. I mean, during the pandemic, I had to cancel about 25 airline tickets, and you try and cancel and get a refund from EasyJet. Good luck. Finding it, clicking, through the maze of deterrence is quite an experience. Now, and all of these things can have adverse downstream consequences. And that's precisely what I want to talk about next, the flow-on consequences of some of these default options, which are exploited through algorithmic content curation. Now, this is where I'm now going to spend a bit more time actually getting into a bit more detail and tell you about a couple experiments and all that jazz. So what's algorithmic content curation? Well, basically, anytime you look at anything on the internet, some algorithm will have shaped that for you. That's sort of a slight oversimplification, but not much. And those news feeds, recommender systems are designed to satisfy your presumed preferences, which works extremely well. Works for me every time I go to Amazon and buy a book. It suggests all the other books I should buy underneath. And whoa, I wish I had the time and money to buy them all because I really want to read them. You know, this works. Amazon knows exactly what I like. It's like having this fantastic partner in life who knows everything about you. It's great. But of course, the flip side is that it puts you inside a bubble of preference satisfaction that may very easily lead you to extremist content. Now, we know that this makes a huge difference. There's some research by Ron Robertson, for example, who showed that if you change the order of information on a search page, the rank order between different political candidates can change the voting intentions of undecided voters by up to 20%. They've run the experiment showing that whoever you put on top attracts more undecided votes than the person at the bottom. So there is a huge potential here for manipulation. And I already mentioned the autoplay on YouTube. Here's some data in support of the importance of that, because 30% of viewing time on YouTube results not from what users want by expressing their preferences in the search bar, but by watching something that the recommender system suggested they should watch. And there's evidence, in fact, there's a student of mine just did a systematic review of the literature in this, and there's evidence that the YouTube recommender system is drawing people towards more and more extreme content, and thereby fostering polarization and extremism. Or at the very least, it's not letting people out of their extremist bubble. So, you know, this stuff has consequences. But they're not all bad. And I think this is what's important to understand and to clarify, that they're binary people in this world. And there's some people out there who say, oh, algorithms are bad, Facebook is bad, all the Google is bad, everything is bad, we're all gonna die. And I don't think that's particularly helpful, because algorithms are indispensable. You use them all the time and they do a great job. It is only that they have dark sides that we have to look at separately from the principle of an algorithm, which I think is indispensable. And, you know, here's just one example. If somebody doesn't like violent movies, why shouldn't Netflix point them towards rom-coms or something nice rather than showing them the Chainsaw Massacres? You know, that's the right thing to do. When it flips around is when a preference that an algorithm identifies involves toxic adverse consequences to others and even to the person themselves to satisfy. So that is where the problem comes in. And here's one example. I just want to run it past you because I did this for one of my lectures last week, a week ago today. And so I wanted to show to my students, well, what does it actually mean if you go into Google, you search something? What happens if you type in Newcastle into Google? So I sat down in the UK, I typed in Newcastle, and I got this. Newcastle United Football Club. That's it. That's the first thing. That's a screen snapshot of my search. I then asked my wife to do exactly the same thing and send me a screen snapshot. She was in Western Australia at the time, and guess what she got on the same result? Obviously, she didn't get anything about Newcastle in the UK or the football club. She got Newcastle, New South Wales, because, you know, I was in Bristol, I got information close to me. She was in WA, she got information that was close to her. Makes perfect sense. It should be that way. But, you know, that's fine in this particular instance. And it's just a nice illustration because it shows how vastly different Google can be at exactly the same time when it's being used for the same keyword in two different locations. That's fine, but there are so many other cases in which it is not fine and in which your data can be used against you. Now, what I want to talk about now is the dark side of algorithms that arises from the power of the digital footprint that you leave behind whenever you like something on Facebook. And the bottom line of this, the take-home message is that if I have access to 300 Facebook likes, then I can identify your personality with greater accuracy than your own spouse. These are data from you et al. What you can see here is the accuracy with which Facebook likes allow you to predict a person's personality, where the accuracy is the alignment with their self-report. So we take the self-report in an instrument in a personality test to be the ground truth. And if the computer were perfectly accurate, it would be at 100% overlap with self-report. Well, it doesn't quite get there, but with 300 likes, it's at about 0.6, and your spouse is about 0.58. All right, so you got 300 likes, you know the person better than their own spouse. 10 likes is sufficient to do better than work colleagues. And 70 is better than to do friends or roommates. So that is how powerful your digital footprint is that is being left behind on Facebook. Now, what that means is that I can translate the likes into personality. Once I've done that, I know from my knowledge of personality what a person's vulnerability is. I mean, any personality comes with a vulnerability. I can then advertise my product, which may be misinformation or political messages. I can advertise that to that person, exploiting their vulnerability without them knowing that that is what's happening. And just in case you're wondering whether this can actually be done, you know, is this real? Well, Facebook has a patent on that. Here it is. It's 10 years old. And it tells you, this is part of the public record, the inferred personality characteristics are stored with the profile, may be used for targeting, ranking, selecting versions of products, and various other purposes. So Facebook has, you know, made a big deal out of this invention. Hey, we can infer people's personality, and then we can use that to make them feel happier, so they say. Now, does this work? I mean, we know it can happen. Can you make it work? And I would argue, yes, you can. There's now a number of studies that have shown that microtargeting, that is presenting an ad to a person based on detailed knowledge about their personality, a number of studies have shown that that works. That is more persuasive than not targeting an ad. Here's one study that showed this, which I like, by Matz et al. They had more than 3 million participants. So power is not an issue in this study. And what they did was to design ads for cosmetics that were either designed to appeal to extroverts or to introverts. And the audience was selected to be extroverted or introverted, outgoing or withdrawn. And here are two examples. The ad on the left, what do you think, extrovert or introvert? Extrovert. Yeah, the one on the right, introvert. But, it could be both. Both of those ads could be for lipstick or whatever, some cosmetic, some product. But this was standardized or designed to appeal to extroverts versus introverts. It was then presented preferentially based on likes to extroverts and introverts on Facebook. And here are the results. Now, green is introverted, blue is extroverted. And the way to read this graph is if the audience color matches the color of the ad, so blue with blue, green with green, you sell more stuff. Now, the dependent variable here was a number of measures of engagement, including dollars. And I'm not showing the dollars, but I'm showing the conversion rate. That is the number of times people click on an ad. And you can see that a match sells more. I could have shown you the dollar figures, they're similar. You actually make more money if you show an introverted ad to an introvert and extroverted to extrovert, rather than not matching. So this works. And there are other studies not done on Facebook that have shown this as well, that if you customize a persuasive message to the person in question, then it is more persuasive than if you don't. Now, why should we care about cosmetics, customized ads? Well, I'm not particularly bothered by cosmetics, to be honest. We can have a conversation about whether that's sort of manipulative or whatever, but it doesn't really, it doesn't keep me up at night. What keeps me up at night is taking the power of microtargeting and putting it to work in a political context. And that is where the harms pile up. Because all of this is exploiting a person's data without their consent. No one knows, except for a few people who read the scientific literature, that every time I like something on Facebook, I'm revealing information about my personality. And that advertisers know this, and they can choose an ad to be targeted at a person based on their likes, hence their personality. But when I get that message, I don't know that I'm getting it, because this person who's manipulating me knows I'm an extrovert or introvert or whatever, and therefore they're pulling my strings in a particular way. Now, also in the political domain, one of the big problems is that targeted messages cannot be corrected in the free marketplace of ideas on which democracy is based. And what that does is to move politics from the public sphere to secret manipulation, potentially, because there's no way the opponent can respond or rebut. Hillary Clinton had no clue in 2016 what was being said about her on Facebook. And she had no ability to rebut that in a nutshell, unless somehow somebody called her up and said, hey, look, I got this weird ad. Do you know about this? Short of that, there was no way for her at the time to know what was going on. The same was true for Brexit. And it was quite striking because I was living in the UK, obviously, during the Brexit campaign. And I was stunned at the time by how nothing that actually happened or was said in public seemed to make a difference to the opinion polls in a way that I'd never before seen in any kind of campaign. I had no idea why that was. I thought there's something weird going on. Well, and now I know what was going on is that there was an industrial strength machine of disinformation happening on Facebook that no one knew about. And that's why the polls didn't move, because anything that happened in the above the waterline was counteracted by this targeted messaging. And obviously it follows that disinformation can then spread without opportunity for correction. And it also allows politicians to make incompatible promises to different segments of the population to get elected, right? And this is, in fact, they got caught. Here's a wonderful example of this. This was the last German election in late 21, I think. Wasn't it September 21 or something, 6 or 8 months ago? And this is the Liberal Party. And it's 2 ads by the same party and about climate change, both ads. The one on the left and the one on the right, when translated into English, say the following. This measure can be a game changer in climate protection. What's the measure? A clear CO2 limit. So they're in favor of a CO2 limit, right? And that'll make all the difference to climate change. Well, except no. They don't like restrictions or for bans or regulations or whatever. They want to have the courage for innovative ideas, for more joy in inventing than in banning. It's a completely different policy, right? Well, the one on the left was sent to people on Facebook who were engaged with organic food and climate protection and, you can guess what else. And the one on the right was targeted at people like frequent travelers or others on Facebook who were presumably less conducive or less receptive, rather, to messages about regulation. So there you go. So what's their policy? No one knows. It's either this or it's that, depending on who you are. I promise you anything. They're in government now, by the way. So that was a clear case of them getting caught in using microtargeting to make contradictory promises. They, of course, deny that. They say, oh, no, this is all totally compatible. We have one policy, and it's all the same. So those are the problems of political micro-targeting, and the public is very much, well, they're very smart, and they overwhelmingly reject the use of personal data for political micro-targeting. In 3 countries, the US, the UK, and Germany, we published that paper last year. Overwhelming, when I say overwhelming, I mean a very strong majority in all 3 countries. In Germany, it was overwhelming. In the UK, halfway in between, and the US was more relaxed. The US doesn't like it as much. I mean, they don't like it, but they're not like, going crazy over it either. The US generally is extremely relaxed relative to other countries, about issues of privacy and personal data use, all that kind of stuff. So the public doesn't like it, but it's happening. What can we do to fix it? Well, obviously we need better regulation, and I showed you that report earlier for the European Commission. I spent 3 months in Brussels last year working with the European Commission and doing nothing but working on ways how this can be done by regulation. But that was a year ago, and nothing has happened, and nothing will happen for another couple of years because this stuff, takes time. So what is it we can do that's quick? Well, what we can do is to reverse engineer microtargeting. And the basic idea here is that we tell users that they might be microtargeted on the basis of their personality. And we then teach them something about themselves to see if that makes them more resilient to subsequent messaging. So we went back to the introversion, extroversion arena. That's a wonderful dimension to choose because we know so much about it, and it's so easy to measure, and it is so, one of the basic attributes of human beings. Extroverts are outgoing, introverts tend to be withdrawn, in a nutshell. So we tell people about their scores on a test such as this one. That's all it takes, these few items, which will identify somebody as an extrovert or introvert. So I think of myself as someone who tends to be quiet. Well, if you disagree strongly, you're probably an extrovert. If you agree, then you're probably an introvert, et cetera, et cetera. This takes about 2 minutes for people to fill in. Then we know their score. Then we can tell them about their score. And then we can see if that makes them more alert to being targeted. So here's the experimental design by way of overview. We have two conditions. In the boosting condition, people are given that questionnaire I just showed you. They're then given extensive feedback on their own performance. And they're then exposed to the ads you've already seen, or some of them, and they have to classify them as being targeted at them or not. And in the control condition, they're given some unrelated questionnaire about affinity for technology, whatever that is. I mean, it's just, you know, some other personality thing, completely irrelevant to the task at hand. So two conditions, but of course, in both cases, we ultimately end up with her introversion, extroversion score. We need that for the scoring. The critical condition is the one with feedback. So after they take the questionnaire, they're being given the description, you know, quite lengthy, that they have to read about extroversion, introversion, and then they're given their own personal score. You're extroverted, you're more extroverted than 83 out of 100 people of your age. And then, you know, the distribution, and if they're introverted, we flip it around. They say you're more introverted than anybody else. And so they get the feedback. Then they're given a sequence of ads, and all they have to say for the ads is, do you think this is targeted at you? Yes or no? Now we tell them that ads can be targeted, you know, so they're not completely blind to the environment. We do tell them that ads could be customized for them, and they have to make a decision. And what happens? Well, what happens is that we get a massive effect, absolutely massive effect of boosting. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, just
Yeah.
with the ads that they call extroversion.
No. Oh, yes.
So there's none that could be like ATI targeted.
Well, if they were, then it would be really, really surprising. But we also have a control condition where we do nothing. So, but yeah, no, they were designed to be either extroverted or introverted. And we chose the ATI to be as unrelated to that as we can possibly think of it. You know, I mean, by chance, there might be some overlap, but I doubt it. So what do we find? Well, in the control condition, people are, you know, significantly above chance. They're at about 0.65 in detecting that they're being targeted. After that personality feedback, they go up nearly 30 percentage points. It's one of the biggest effects I've ever seen. You know, 0.9, the mean is around 90%. The modal response is 100% accurate. So makes a huge difference in a you know, 2-minute manipulation, something like 2-minute intervention, roughly. People jump 30 percentage points. Now, what does it take to achieve this? We then ran another study shown here. I don't have to go into the details that much. Basically, up here, we kept the questionnaire, but got rid of the feedback to see if the feedback matters. Down here, we also got rid of the questionnaire. So there's no feedback, no questionnaire. All they learn down in the bottom condition is some paragraph about extroversion, introversion. You know, basically, you know, some vignette that says extroverted people are outgoing, introverted people are, you know, they like to read books. And what do you get? Well, you get no effect if you don't have the questionnaire, you just tell people about introversion, extroversion. That's insufficient. The boosting condition adds nothing to the control condition. Control condition is again above chance. In fact, in this experiment, people were a little better than in the first one, but no effect of just describing the personality attribute to them. If you add the questionnaire, but without the feedback, but people at least do the questionnaire, start thinking about themselves, then you get a boost, about 15%. Significant, big effect, but not, by far, not quite as big as the thing you get with the full Monty, which is the questionnaire plus feedback plus the description. But still, that's, for something that only takes a few minutes, that's kind of impressive. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that we can teach people very rapidly how to detect that something is targeted at them, at least on this particular dimension of personality. We haven't tried other personalities, and we also haven't tried political messages, and we also haven't ascertained whether this would make them more resistant to being manipulated. All of these things are currently in progress, and ask me again in 6 months and we'll have more of an answer there. But we do have the first answer, which is you can teach people that they're being. Oh, sorry. Yes, Andy, over to you.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just asking this now because it's about this particular study, which I found very cool. But I wonder how much of the boost you got is less because you're telling people about themselves and more because you're implicitly telling them that we know this information. And, because I think most people probably already know whether they're extroverts or introverts. And really the sort of, for me, imagining myself in the study, really the key information is that, hey, I know they know I'm an introvert. And, and then I'm going to be liable to look out for the targeting.
Okay, so how do you explain that there's no effect when I just tell you that introverts and extroverts exist, and I then ask you to identify the ads? How do you explain
because you
that?
haven't told me that you know that I'm an introvert. You're just, you're just putting up, whatever, some content.
Okay, fair enough. But then if you take the questionnaire and I don't give you feedback, how do you know that I know?
Because I assume that if you're giving me the questionnaire, then that you have the results of that. Yeah, I basically, I think, it's interesting either way. It's just that one is information about a person and one is information about what information the platform has
about you. So what you're saying is it's a direct effect of revealing our knowledge about the person that would make them more sensitive to the detection. Yeah, okay.
So if you had an alternate condition where they didn't take the test, you just say, hey, we know you're an introvert, whatever, and then ask the exact same thing. Yeah.
That's an interesting idea. I don't think we've done that. No, I don't think we've done that. Oh, so we tell them at random, even if it's not true. The problem with that is then we can't score it, right? We have to somehow know whether or not people are introverts and extroverts before we can score the experiment.
Yeah, I see the issue.
It's a little bit difficult, but I take your point. Well, maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's just them knowing that we know that makes them more sensitive. Possibly, yeah. Interesting idea. Okay, good. Let me move on for a few more minutes, if that's okay. I still have, all right. About the last pressure point, misinformation and disinformation. Well, this is another one of these things that's it's an entire semester that could be filled with that topic. So I'll try to just sketch out the surface of misinformation and fake news. Now, there's a couple of funny things about misinformation and fake news. The first funny thing is that if you do big data analyses of social media usage and all that sort of stuff, then you can arguably find that true fake news, the stuff that's really blatantly made up by teenagers in Macedonia, very few Americans are exposed to that. However, fake news can nonetheless set the political agenda. And I think it's important to acknowledge that few people go to fake news sites, but it's equally important to then not dismiss the problem, because the problem is not the 3 people who go to a website. It is everybody else who talks about the fake news, and which can then set the agenda. And there's plenty of evidence of extremist right-wing chat rooms trying out messages, some of which surprisingly went viral because the meme caught on. One of them is Pizzagate. I don't know if you remember that. It was this accusation back in 2016 that the Democrats were operating a pedophile ring out of the basement of a pizza joint in Washington. There was a few things wrong with that. For example, there was no basement to begin with, but it didn't keep a guy from driving up there from North Carolina and starting to fire shots inside these restaurants in search of these presumed victims. And of course, the insurrection last year, 6th of January, is the best example there is of fake news and invention and mendacity to lead to very, very measurable adverse consequences for democracy. So as far as I'm concerned, there's plenty of reason to be concerned. We now have an increasing number of studies that try to establish the causality of this using some very clever statistical techniques like instrumental variable analysis. This one was instrumental variable analysis. And so, for example, if you watched Fox News early on in the pandemic, you were more likely to die because you were more likely to not wear a mask, to not stay home, to not keep your social distance, more likely to get infected, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that causal pipeline was established by 2 papers with, sufficient confidence for me to accept it. In an experimental setting, you can very easily show that exposure to misinformation changes people's intentions to get vaccinated. For example, exposure to hateful content causes anti-refugee violence. If you cut, hypothetically speaking, if you could cut hate content by 50%, you would have a measurably smaller number of physical attacks on refugees on the streets. This was done in Germany. In all these cases, the causality was established by looking at variation in a variable that by itself could not have caused the outcome. So that to me is plenty of reason to be concerned. What are we going to do about it? Well, I don't have time to get into this, but again, if I were on Zoom, I would now pop this link into the chat. My colleagues and I wrote another version of the Debunking handbook about a year and a half ago in 2020. This is a whole set of 25 people or so who collaborated on this, and that is state of the art pretty much still. The world hasn't changed that much. State of the art hints about how to debunk misinformation. And just another 2 minutes or so, very briefly, one thing that we have been looking at, my colleagues and I, is at inoculation. What's inoculation? Well, inoculation is the idea, it's similar to the cosmetic ads boosting study. It's the idea that you catch people before they're being exposed to misinformation, and you preemptively tell them how they might be misled without telling them necessarily the specific content of a message. And so this is the crucial thing. You need to know ahead of time how people will be misinformed, but not what they will see. And it turns out that's very easy to do, because people who misinform, by definition, they're stating falsehoods. And you cannot do that. You cannot state falsehoods without doing something wrong. I mean, you cannot say the earth is flat and then present evidence for that and for that evidence to make sense. It's just not possible because the earth isn't flat. And so you can tell people ahead of time of how they may be misled. things like incoherence of an argument. You can teach people, hey, this is incoherent, watch out. If somebody is incoherent, then they're misleading you because they can't possibly be right, because the world isn't incoherent. You know, we've got like 300 years of philosophy to tell us that. And this has been shown to work in many contexts, from climate change to radicalizing material, Islamophobic as well as Islamist. And so this is similar to the boosting idea. We have brief videos. We now have a video that's 30 seconds, and that's sufficient to inoculate people against misinformation. We've shown that on YouTube with 24,000 subjects or something. So, you know, this thing scales up and you can use it. And there's a whole separate lecture in this on inoculation. But I'm out of time, so I will leave it at that. We do have a serious problem globally with the decline in democracy all around the world. And at least some of that is due to cognitive pressure points between basic human cognition and the online architectures. And when the two get together, then, well, then you get what you're seeing now. And with that, I'll thank you and I welcome your questions.
Sorry, do you?
Could you, by the way, repeat the questions that are asked in the
Yes, I can.
theater? Thanks.
Although we're trying to make the mic
Is that
work.
better? Yeah.
Can you hear that one, Andy? Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask, have you done any sort of analysis between like people's basic logical reasoning with their ability to comprehend misinformation? So
Yes.
like I can think of many examples of like conversations that I'm sure a lot of us have had where there is less basic logical reasoning that makes it harder to say this is factual. So
yes. The answer really is just as simple as that. Yes. Analytical thinking is a critical skill to have, and the less of that people have, the more they fall from this information. But there's a footnote to that. That is only part of the problem. To my mind, the biggest problem is fundamental distrust. The real problem, you know, the horsepower issue, yeah, sure. You know, that is a problem. But what's far more important is whether or not people are inherently distrustful of the government and everybody else, and doctors and nurses and car mechanics and whoever else it is, or not. And it is the distrust that is driving this that's a very, very strong predictor. And it's driving it in a particular way. We have a study that just came out in personality and individual differences, where we show that we use COVID-19 vaccine attitudes as the lever to you know, prize apart people who are high and low in trust. And we find that those who are low in trust, so they're not getting the COVID-19 vaccine, they are more likely to believe anything that opposes an official account, and they're less likely to believe the official account. Now, the official account is something like the Earth is revolving around its axis once every 24 hours. If you're highly distrustful, you will believe that less than others. What you will believe instead is the Earth sometimes revolves one way and then the other way, and it flips back and forth and we never notice. Okay, so it's very fundamental facts. It's things like, you know, where there really is no doubt about the reality. And yet for that, if there's an alternative available that is denying that, highly distrustful people will believe that in preference to the real account. So I think that distrust is the biggest problem. Yes.
Just on that topic, since you think that, you know, and it seems clear that trust is such an important driver of whether we're believing misinformation or something like that. And as a lot of us here, I think, come from a cognitive perspective, do you think there's work to be done, or what kind of work do you think can be done to integrate these cognitive level models and theories with this sort of social information of trust? Because I think that's something that a lot of us here are interested in doing and that we've discussed before.
Well, I think there's a lot of work. I mean, okay, the trust issue specifically is a huge, big issue that is extremely difficult to deal with, and because ultimately that's all politics, and your little bit of cognition is nice, but it's not going to change the world, frankly. I mean, there's one thing I've learned as a cognitive scientist is that cognitive science is great, but if you want it to have an effect, you gotta change the politics or the policies, and you gotta talk to policymakers and try change things there. So when it comes to trust, the way to build trust is, well, first of all, you got to be trustworthy, number one. So, you know, politicians who lie whenever their lips are moving are not a good way to create trust in a government or in a society. So you got to deal with that. And it turns out the best way to build trust is through local grassroots, local government initiatives. You know, your local libraries and your local schools, they're the sort of transmission points where you can actually intervene and make a difference at the level of the community, which of course you can't do if their funding is being cut. So, you know, I mean, it's hugely difficult to do something about the trust issue. But yes, there are opportunities for cognitive scientists to make a difference. For example, what I was talking about today, you know, once you understand human attention and how it is biased towards negativity, well, that gives you an immediate lever, because you can then, contrary to what Kevin was saying, you can then regulate, and you can say to the algorithms, hang on, guys, in a democracy, you're not allowed to polarize people by presenting them with crap. You know, I mean, no one in their right mind in a democracy would have designed the environment we're living in now. If 20 years ago, somebody had said, oh, we're going to have this machine that produces polarization so that we all hate each other and we don't talk to each other anymore, no one would have said that's okay. Of course not. It just evolved. But just because it has evolved doesn't mean we can't do anything about it. And the trick is to find regulations that don't involve censorship, but nonetheless solve the problem. And that's another 3 talks. Yes, there. Oh, I also want to make sure. Somebody's hand. No, that was a thumb. Okay.
Hello.
Yeah, go.
I was wondering if you could comment on the historical perspective here. So if you think about what happened last century, Second World War, there were fascist governments in many places. So I guess my thought is there's been plenty of bad things happening even without online media. So if we took all the online stuff, wouldn't people still find a way to do the things that people have been doing for centuries?
Yes, absolutely. I think, yeah, totally. That is certainly true. And that's why I was saying at the very outset that to just blame social media for this is not appropriate. It's also overlooking the fact that social media can have incredibly positive effects. One of the things I didn't have time to tell you about is that we have a systematic review of this whole literature kind of in the pipeline. It's not yet in press, but you know, it'll get there, where we look at all the evidence relating democracy to social media and online media usage. And what you find is that the pattern is mixed. Now, the interesting thing is that most of the positive effects of social media on democracy are happening in the developing world, where the internet is indeed something like, you know, freedom technology, which is what it was purported to be when it first came out, right? We were all supposed to be in this global village and happy and talk to each other and all that. Well, that kind of happens sort of sometimes in the developing world. The negative effects on democracy are prevailing in established democracies. So it is in our societies where we have things like polarization that's getting out of control. Now, but even here, there are positive effects of social media, namely political knowledge. People who spend a lot of time on social media reading politics know more about politics. They're just also much more highly polarized. So, so to answer your question, you know, I mean, there's always been people doing bad things, bad faith actors, you know, pursuing their own bad goals. And I think they really are bad. I'm not a believer in the symmetry between, you know, oh, these poor little Nazis over here, and, you know, you have to respect them. I don't, actually, I don't. So they're bad people doing bad things. That's always been the case. And if the conditions are right, then they can find traction. And right now, the conditions, unfortunately, are right when you look at things like inequality and various other societal factors. And it's another talk. But the fact that Trump found traction is not coincidental. You know, 20 years ago, Trump would have been laughed off the stage on day one. The only reason he found traction now, despite his lies, in fact, because of his lies, that's the interesting thing. Trump's lies are a feature, not a bug. And it's a feature that appeals to people who feel left behind or threatened in a society. And you can explain when that happens. And we're now living in societal circumstances that are conducive to fascism and populism. And that is a real problem. And social media is amplifying it maybe, but it's not the root cause. Yes, sir.
Again on trust, obviously everyone trusts the company, so
yeah, well, okay, very good. Could you hear that, Andy? Was that? No?
No,
okay.
sorry, I was muted there.
It was turned off. We'll try it again.
Yeah, so I was saying, you said distrust is the key factor, but specifically is that distrust in institutions, media, science, the mainstream, the traditional, or yeah. And is that trust in, you know, the contrarian family and friends? What is that specifically?
Yeah, very good question. Okay, gosh, I mean, the literature on trust is a warehouse full of nuance, right? So I can't do that justice in 30 seconds. But what we find is that there is a decadal trend in many Western societies of a loss of trust in institutions at all levels of government, but also scientists. There's also a decline in interpersonal trust. It turns out that interpersonal trust is actually also important in this. Somewhat surprisingly, I was surprised when I read about that because I thought it was all about trust in governments and institutions. Well, no, it's not only that. It is also interpersonal trust that plays a role. Now, and that's been going on since the 1970s, this decline in trust. And so you can't blame social media for that. But of course, social media does amplify distrust because it clearly leads to polarization. And then you end up just believing people from your own tribe. And this is the paradox in all this, that the people who are highly distrustful are also actually incredibly gullible, right? I mean, this is one thing about conspiracy theorists generally. They themselves think they're skeptical, but they're not. They're just rejecting anything anybody who knows anything about it has said. What they believe instead is some random dude on Twitter, right? Well, I call that gullible. That's not skepticism. So it's just who people choose to trust, and they, you know, they'll invariably trust somebody on Facebook who is saying that, you know, the Democrats are killing children in a basement in the pizza, you know, that they believe. It's, you know, they won't believe the architect who says there is no basement.
Okay, check. Yeah, I have a question actually about two topics in the presentation. One was about, I guess, interventions to raise awareness about being micro-targeted. The other one is about misinformation, inoculation. I'm just curious about the dynamics. Like if you scroll through Facebook or you see ads, it's really fast paced. To what extent do these interventions really, are they really helpful and robust in the wild? Like when everything's super fast paced?
Yeah, very good question. Well, we did a study on YouTube where we presented people with a 30-second video. And I think it was dressed up as an ad. I can't remember now. We do so many studies. I'm hazy on the details. But we had this video up on YouTube, and the video was played, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of times or something. And people voluntarily watched this. Then within 24 hours after that, they were presented with a single item test, one of various items, but they only did one. They clicked on one thing. They responded to one item. That was also, I think, presented as an ad, but had no overt connection to the video that they saw up to 24 hours earlier. And we asked them a question, whatever was boosted in the video, you know, I can't remember now, you know, something about emotionality or something, whatever we were inoculating people against. And we found a highly significant effect. People get better at detecting highly emotional information if they've just watched our video, and up to a 24-hour delay, and the video is only 30 seconds. So I think that's kind of a proof of concept of scalability of these manipulations. Okay, thank you. Thanks. And any more questions? I'm around for until Thursday. So.
I was wondering how the power when algorithms get it wrong. So this came up when I was looking at the study versus
Yes.
scale. What is dichotomized between the work in that narrative?
Yeah.
Yeah. But as a personal anecdote, I published a paper on erectile dysfunction last year, and after we did that, I started getting erectile dysfunction ads, which I personally really enjoy. They're like quite like that. But every time I see one of those ads, I know why I get that target.
Right.
So I spend a lot of time.
Yes.
Stuff.
Yes.
But for me,
Yes.
that's a salient thing. Every time I see that ad, I know like this ad is targeted.
Ha ha. Yeah. Yeah.
So I wonder in general, rather than using stuff that people understand about themselves when they see serving you something that correctly doesn't fit with things.
Yes.
Whether that is another way of
That's an excellent point. And of course, we all have anecdotes like that. You know, I mean, if I buy a kitchen table and then once I've bought it, this is the other funny thing. Once I've bought the kitchen table, that's when I get all the ads for the next 6 months, trying to sell me more tables, you know. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that. And that's one of the things people say to me quite a lot. They say, well, why are you worried about algorithms? Look at how stupid they are. You know, they send me stuff I'm not interested in. And that's true, and it sticks out. But I think, you know, the trouble is when it doesn't stick out, that's probably when we're being manipulated or we're being shown stuff that somebody thinks is going to manipulate us. And the problem is it doesn't take much. That's one of the big problems. The Trump election, when he got elected, the number of voters who put him into the White House fits within one football stadium. Right? They just happen to be in the key states. And in all of those key states, if some African Americans hadn't stayed home, right, Hillary would have won the election. And the reason I'm saying African Americans is because they were specifically targeted with messages that encourage them to stay home. And that's very easy to do. You know, people are complacent, people are kind of, they can't be bothered, it's hard to vote, you know, you have to take time off work in the US. If you're Black, you're probably having a great difficulty voting anyway, because they're making it hard. So, you know, it's very easy if you're sitting on Facebook and every day somebody says, oh, your vote doesn't matter, Hillary will win anyway, or, oh, don't go and vote because you're just doing the white man's job, or whatever, you know. It doesn't take much to swing an election, I think. That's why even small effects are very significant and they scale up. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just also really interested in the analysis that you've done. Did it take into account age at all, like age of participants in the study?
Yeah. Yes, and there was no effect. Otherwise,
Oh, not at all.
not in this particular study. No, no. There are studies showing that older people are more susceptible to misinformation. The age is certainly in the United States is a major driver. Old people over 65, I suppose, share misinformation 8 times more than younger people. Something like that. It's an extreme effect.
So I would just assume that that's not so much to do with lack of familiarity.
Unresolved, we don't know. I wouldn't bet on that yet. There's a review paper by Brashear and Schachter that came out last year, I think, where they looked at that. And basically, that's not entirely clear what's going on. It could be a cohort effect. It could be familiarity. It could also be a social effect, so that they share misinformation to get their grandkids angry. So at least they call their granny and talk to them. Well, I mean, if you're home alone, you're 85, you haven't heard from your grandkids, why not just wind them up? That's a serious hypothesis. And Bryony Swire-Thompson is running a study right now at Northeastern that'll sort this out, because she's doing it. It's a very, very complicated project, but extremely good. So we'll have some answers on that in about 6 months. Yeah.
Just on that, 'cause I think something you mentioned, target on like making people understand that they are being targeted, right? My anecdotal experience feels like people around, like we know
Right.
we're getting targeted, and we're very. I'd like to think we're very kind of sensitive to learn. Oh, okay, like I just Googled this, and now all the stuff's coming.
Yeah.
And so you'd think that because we're more aware, potentially, and I don't know if this is actually true, because we're more aware, is that, or are we even more?
Well, I think as a first approximation, you're right. Younger people are less susceptible to misinformation, but once you get below sort of 65, the function is relatively flat. I mean, it's not quite as striking as you might think.
Also, that maybe when it comes to the science as well, it may tend to
Yes. And although what's interesting is that only about 20 to 30% of people will share things that they know to be wrong. Most people don't like to share things that are wrong. So because it damages their reputation, there's a reputational cost. And there's some interesting work on that. But about 20 to 30% of people are quite happily sharing things that they know to be wrong, because it's just, yeah, it makes them feel good.
I was wondering the extent to which the stuff that you focused on and looked at applies in situations where you have traits that aren't so stable. So extroversion, introversion is something that is a stable characteristic, but with stuff like political affiliation or stuff that's unfolding in a dynamic sense as people go further down into these bubbles of information, how much that plays into the process of being aware that things might be being targeted at you. Like, can they introspect to that degree? Like, I'm displaying this pattern that might be identifying me as being someone who is susceptible to this?
Well, okay, in terms of, let me pick up on the stability issue, first of all. I actually think, certainly in the United States, political identity has become extremely stable and very important to people's lives. there's data to suggest that affective polarization along political lines in the US is greater than racial polarization. Now that's a pretty tall bar to exceed racial resentment in terms of magnitude. That's profound. And so I think it's actually those identities are extremely stable, political identities. So I'm afraid they're not, they're not quite as malleable.
Maybe we should stop at this
Okay,
stage.
sure.
Take him down to the evening for perhaps a small lunch or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to join us, please come with us or look around for us.